Hello again. Welcome to the sixth and final video of the Christmas story. I'm presenting this for the Sunday school class at Trinity Fellowship Church in Tyler, Texas, but I know many of you are tuning in who are not part of that class. Thanks for joining me. Now, this is the last in the Christmas series, and after this, we're going to take a short break, and when we get into January, I'll be covering the book of Hebrews in another Bible study series. So we've covered before the birth of Jesus Christ, we've covered his birth in the eyes of Mary and then in the eyes of Joseph. And now we're going to take a look at these mysterious men called the Magi, or the wise men from the East. So thank you again for tuning in. I ask you, if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, hit the subscribe button, and that will help to get more promotion for these Bible series that are bringing the light of Jesus Christ into a dark world. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to show the harmony of the Gospels between Matthew and Luke in their depiction of what happens after the birth of Jesus Christ. So I'm going to start right off here with Matthew chapter 1, the very end of the chapter, which we covered last week, where Joseph has had a dream from an angel and he's been reaffirmed to take Mary as his wife. So this is Matthew chapter 1, verse 24. Then Joseph, being aroused from sleep, did as the angel of the Lord commanding him, and took to him his wife, and did not know her till she had brought forth her firstborn son, and he called his name Jesus. And that's all it says in the book of Matthew about the birth of Jesus Christ. Joseph's affirmation to take Mary as his wife, and then her firstborn son, he would call his name Jesus. Now, chapter 2 starts off with the visitation of three Magi from the East. But between the end of chapter 1 of the book of Matthew and the beginning of chapter 2, there's about a 2-year gap that takes place there where nothing is said. And we can explore how we know that in a little bit when we get back into it. But just kind of settle that in your mind. Between the birth of Jesus Christ and the wise men's visit to Jerusalem, there's a 2-year gap. Now, over in the book of Luke, and we pick this up in Luke chapter 2, and so many other events have happened that Matthew did not record after Jesus' birth. One is, it records the circumcision of Jesus Christ, and then the presentation of Jesus in the temple, where Simeon and Anna have a number of proclamations of prophecy about the birth of Jesus Christ. And at the end of that, we have Anna speaking. This is in this is in Luke chapter 2 in verse 38. And Anna's last sentence is this: "And coming in that instant, she gave thanks to the Lord and spoke of him to all who looked for the redemption in Jerusalem." Those are Anna's words. Now, another 2-year gap. This is Luke chapter 2. That was verse 38. Now, 39, it says, "So when they had performed all these things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth." In that 2-year gap, a number of things happened, which were covered back in the book of Matthew. Okay? So let's go back to Matthew. After the birth of Jesus Christ, 2 years transpired. How do we know this? Well, the wise men are going to be recorded here in the book of Luke, chapter 2. And one of the evidences that there's a time gap between the birth of Jesus Christ as a baby in a manger and when the wise men showed up is the words. Now, describing the birth of Jesus Christ in a manger, Luke in chapter 2, verse 16 uses the word baby and manger. Baby being the Greek word brephos, and manger being the word phatne. So in describing the birth of Jesus Christ, the Greek words bathos and phatne are as baby, like a little infant. In fact, the same word is used when Elizabeth is describing the embryo, John the Baptist, in her womb. Bathos is an embryo and a tiny baby in swaddling clothes. All right, bathos. Now, when the Magi came to see this baby or this child, it's a child now. This is in Matthew 2, verse 9 and verse 11. They use the word child, which in Greek is paedon, which means child, like a little, baby in diapers, maybe between the age of 1 and 3 or so. Okay? And instead of manger, which was phatne, now they're using the word house or home, which is oikion. So when the Magi came to visit Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, they found them in a home, not a manger, and they found a little toddler instead of a tiny baby. So that indicates a time gap. So, and I don't want to be the Grinch that stole your Christmas, but we've been taught, and I've been taught, that somehow the wise men, the Magi, showed up at the manger. In so many of our displays, the nativity scenes, or the creche that people call it, whether it's on a mantelpiece with these figurines, or in some church yards, or even in some town areas, there's a scene, a manger scene. And in the typical manger scene, you have Mary, Joseph, and the baby, maybe some animals, angels, shepherds. All of that is scriptural. Those characters at the manger scene are scriptural and verified in Scripture. But they also would show the 3 wise men. And there's a lot of inconsistencies between that picture and what's in the Bible. According to what we just learned, the wise men were not there at the manger where the infant was. They were at a home where the child was. Now there's another verification of this, and it's frankly a little horrific. But later on we're going to see when the Magi come to Herod, who's the king of the Jews, the king of that area in the world, in Jerusalem. Herod was so paranoid, about any conspiracy against his leadership, he would kind of go crazy. And so he issued a decree that all the children in the Bethlehem area, aged 2 years old and younger, would be killed. So why would he choose a 2-year gap? If the wise men came immediately when the baby was in the manger, that would only have to be maybe a 6-month period. But he wanted to cover the possibility of the age of this baby who was proclaimed to be the king of the Jews. So he gave a 2-year gap. So there's a couple of what I see as verifiable facts from the Bible that the wise men were not at the manger. Another thing with the wise men. Take a look at that. So here's where we find them. This is Matthew chapter 2. 2-year gap since the birth of Jesus Christ. About. Could be 18 months, could be 2.5 years. Somewhere in that time frame. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. Reading that, how many wise men were there? It simply says wise men from the east. It's plural, so there are more than one. So anywhere between 2 and, 20, or whatever number you want to put in there. Now, one of the reasons that they're depicted as 3 is because they brought gifts. Frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Frankincense and myrrh being very expensive spices from the east. And of course, gold is a valuable mineral. So when people read, well, there were 3 gifts, somehow either artistically or traditionally, they say, well, there were 3 kings, 3 wise men, 3 magi. We don't know. Not important, but what I'm trying to do here is reveal and explain what it says in the Bible about this most important historic moment in the history of mankind, the birth of Jesus Christ. And the problem, with Christmas for the last, centuries, religious people and well-meaning historical people, whoever, have layered upon layer upon layer of traditions and sort of interesting theories or myths that cover up the truth of the Bible. So my effort here is to try to uncover some of those layers and not to dispel. If you've got a beautiful, expensive display on your mantle that has those wise men there, that's fine. That's fine. Just kind of say in your mind, well, they came later. And not to the house, not to the manger, not to the baby, but to the house and a child. All right. Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. So you can look at this as somewhat of a diplomatic envoy from some area in the east. 3 magi, wise men, scholars, whatever you want to call them. And apparently they're stargazers, they're astronomers, and they have seen this this glowing, star-like light. I believe it was a spiritual, miraculous presentation, not necessarily an alignment of the planets or a special star. I think it was a miraculous view of the glory of God in the sky. Because didn't we see earlier last week that the angels filled the sky with glory? So they said, we've seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. They said this to King Herod. So it's kind of like a diplomatic envoy coming from one capital somewhere in the east, we'll talk about this later, to the capital of Judea to the king, because that's where you would go. If you assumed, right, that this is a sign of the king of the Jews, you might be thinking, well, maybe this is one of Herod's grandsons. You know, somewhere in the line of Herod, this must be. All right? So they came to worship him. When Herod, the king, heard this, he was troubled. Well, we know that Herod could have been troubled because he was known to take out anyone that he thought was guilty of a conspiracy against his power, to include 2 of his wives, his mother-in-law, and 3 of his sons. So to Herod, eliminating people who were a threat to his authority was a political reality. When he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where this Christ was to be born. See, you know, Herod was Roman birth, mixed birth, something, not quite sure. But he was unsure of what these Magi were talking about. So he gathered, you know, Pharisees, Sadducees, chief priests of the Jewish leadership, and he inquired where this Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem in Judea, because they were referring to the prophets. So they knew where he was going to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, this is verse 6 of Matthew chapter 2. It's a reference to the prophecy which says, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are not the least among the rulers of Judea. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." And what's fascinating to me is that in order to know what was happening in the present day in the area around Jerusalem, they referred to the prophets, showing how much the Jewish people depended upon the truth that the prophets had said. Now, what's interesting also is, unless it's just something that wasn't covered in Scripture, these chief priests of the temple did not necessarily go to worship Jesus. They had the head knowledge, you know, that this is where he's supposed to be born. They had these scholars that came from a foreign country who saw a star that led them to the place where Jesus was. But the chief priests and the scribes, there's no evidence that they really made the effort. So now we're on verse 7. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also." Now we know from a little bit later in the scripture that his intention is not to worship this king. His intention is to have him eliminated. Verse 9, Matthew 2, verse 9. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And now, this is that Greek word that says he's a young child at this point, not a baby. So 1.5 to 3 years has transpired since the birth of Jesus Christ. Verse 10, when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they had come to the house, again, not a manger here, a house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. On their faces, probably, prostrate before this young child. these scholarly Magi from a foreign country worshiping this baby. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. The dream obviously told them not to inform Herod where this baby was, specifically. Now, Herod already knew that he was in the region of Bethlehem, but instead of going back and saying, well, here is exactly where this child was born, in this house, or was living in this house with Mary and Joseph, they went around Jerusalem on a different route and headed back to their home country in the east. Now we're at Matthew chapter 2, verse 13. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. This is the second dream that Joseph has had of the angel. The angel said, "Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So these events transpired for reasons that were part of the actual narrative at the time it was happening, but for another reason, to fulfill all the prophecies that were told by the prophets about the birth of Jesus Christ. Now the sad part. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. He sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem in all its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time when he had determined from the wise men. In other words, from the wise men, he had determined the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. And according to that time, his edict went out to destroy all the male child 2 years and younger. So here we have another evidence of the fact that the wise men, however many there were, from wherever they came, was about 2 years, maybe 1.5, 2 years from the birth of Christ until this terrible moment of the massacre of the innocents. Then it was fulfilled, spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, this is verse 18 of Matthew 2. This is the voice of the prophet once again. And the prophets told the truth. Whether the truth was, wonderful, like the birth of the Messiah, to something as disastrous and horrific as this event, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Now, when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph again. So this is Joseph's, third dream? One to tell him to marry Mary. The second one to get out of Bethlehem and get to Egypt to escape the massacre. And then this third time saying, "Arise, take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who brought the young child's life are dead." In other words, Herod has died. Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But he heard that Archelaus, who was Herod's son, now in power after Herod's death, he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, and was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside to the region of Galilee and came and dwelt in the city of Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So now we get back to the gap, the end of the gap, where in the book of Luke, after the presentation in the temple, it stops. There's this gap where this happened, and then it picks up again where the Holy Family is in Nazareth, returned to Nazareth after all this time. And again, the family returns to Nazareth. And then chapter 3 of the book of Matthew, it talks about John the Baptist. So long. God bless you.